Hey everybody, this is Jesse Krieger. Welcome back. And in this video, I'm excited to be joined by Dani Alcorn, the Chief Operating Officer at Writing Academy. And Writing Academy is one of the contributors of an amazing prize that's part of the writing contest, which is access to over a dozen courses they've created specifically geared to help authors in fiction and nonfiction writing memoir as well as romance to really write a great book and to do it right from the start, as well as help with many other aspects of the author journey. So excited to welcome Dani. Dani, how are you doing today?
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you. And for those watching, this is our second do-over. We were just getting off to the races and then had some tech malfunction, but such is life on the internet sometimes. But
It's just a warm up.
exactly. When we were on the topic, there was like some ambulance stuff going on. I was like, is the library okay? Is the fireman? But I think we're all good to go here. So, in this conversation and in this training presentation, Dani has agreed to share what she calls the 4 dramatic elements to story writing and to writing your book, as well as a 3-act story structure that can really work well for all genres of fiction. So I'll let Dani jump into each of those, and I'm sure I'll have some questions along the way.
Yeah, definitely. So at Writing Academy, we're an online school and community for aspiring authors. And so we really put an emphasis on story structure and having a plan for what you're going to write before you commit all of the effort that it takes to write 50 to 100,000 or more words of your manuscript. Because what we see a lot is that people have a great idea and they get inspired and they start writing, and then they peter out because they either don't know where they're going or they've written themselves into a corner and get discouraged. And you can avoid that by having a solid plan and understanding of your story structure before you commit any words to the page. And so that process all begins with what we call the 4 dramatic elements. And the first dramatic element is very personal. It's your passion for why you want to write this project. And that passion could be anything. It could be simply that you have always dreamed of writing a novel and want to see your name on the cover of a published book. And if that's going to motivate you from page 1 all the way to the end, that's a perfectly fine passion to go in with. Your passion could also be about a particular topic or activism that you want to speak to with your work. Whatever it is, it's the thing that is going to fuel your motivation throughout the project. So it's very helpful to actually sit down and think about what your passion is so that you can return to it and remind yourself when the going gets tough.
And I know you've mentioned on the topic of passion that that's not necessarily what the end reader will see. It's more of your personal motivation as the writer, as the person writing the book.
Exactly. Yeah. Your reader may or may not be able to deduce your passion by the time they finish your manuscript. It's very personal. If it's something that is aligned with the next dramatic element, they'll may be able to figure out what it is. But yeah, it could be something that your reader never knows. It's just for you. But the next dramatic element is what your reader will take away from your book, and that is your book's theme. And theme is the big idea behind your book. It is, people start describing their theme and they'll veer off into pages and pages or paragraphs and paragraphs of description. And they're almost always describing plot. They've sort of lost the kernel because a theme almost always boils down to a very simple statement. For example, a theme could be love conquers all or overcoming prejudice. These kind of simple, big picture ideas are what the takeaway is at the end of a manuscript. It's when years later, the thing that your reader remembers about your book, what it was about in a very simple phrase. And again, coming up with a very clear-cut theme at the beginning allows you to check in with yourself as you're writing and make sure that all of the things that you're coming up with and the ideas that you're including in your manuscript are serving that theme and the work as a whole so that you avoid writing yourself into corners or having to cut material that you slaved over later because it doesn't fit with the rest of your manuscript. And a way that the theme is reinforced, probably the strongest way that the theme is reinforced throughout your manuscript, is actually by the third dramatic element, which is your protagonist or main character's flaw. And some authors are kind of surprised when they hear that come up. They hear that their protagonist, this hero, is imperfect. But in fact, that's why we like to read. That's why we like to watch stories. That's part of storytelling, is we see someone who is flawed overcome that flaw, and we're rooting for them throughout. And so this character flaw is fundamental to the story that you're telling. And having a clearly well-defined character flaw is what will make your structure really, really work. And the thing is, if you pick a flaw that's aligned with your theme, in the end, when the character overcomes it, it will reinforce your theme. So it will be this, beautiful cyclical relationship between the theme and the flaw, and they can reinforce and, build upon each other. And so I would say that the number one most common character flaw out there, and this is across any genre of fiction you could choose, the most common character flaw is lack of self-confidence, because that can manifest itself in so many different ways. The other pitfall that beginning authors sometimes face is that they try and describe behaviors as the flaw instead of the fundamental thing that is causing that flaw. So you've got some common story structuring flaws would be lack of self-confidence, naivete, lack of self-worth, inability to put the past behind, inability to overcome the past. And so those are fundamental things that can be overcome over the course of the manuscript. And we'll talk about when I talk about story structuring. Basically, your job is to keep hammering away at that flaw until the character finally goes, I get it. I see how I have to change. And so once you have your theme and once you have your flaw, you put it all together in the final dramatic element, which is the premise. And the premise is a very simple statement. Now, this is not a log line or a marketing document or anything that you're ever going to show anybody, which is why it sounds a little repetitive. This is just for you as a writer to reinforce how these elements work in your manuscript. So the basic template for a premise is, what if a flawed protagonist encounters some problem and has to overcome the flaw in order to solve the problem? It sounds repetitive, but here's what it does. It reinforces that you have a flawed character. Now, this specific flaw that you've chosen for your story is the thing that keeps them from solving their problem on page 1. If they didn't have this flaw, or this flaw wasn't preventing them, your story would be over and there would be no reason for anybody to keep turning pages. So instead, the second half of the premise is they have to overcome this flaw in order to solve their problem. So you have just in a single, albeit repetitive sentence, explained the entire arc of your story. Yeah, there's a lot of nuts and bolts that need to get added, but that is the big picture and backbone of the story, the emotional heart that you're telling. We also make a distinction between plot and story, which are words that I think most of us use interchangeably in everyday speech. But for us writers, we use story to refer to the emotional journey that your character is on. And we use plot to refer to all of the physical stuff that's happening. The plot details would be how they get from point A to point B. The story details would be how they change along that path. So you have a lot of plot to add later, but the story is the backbone, and this does a beautiful job of summing that up.
I love that. Thanks so much. That was really insightful, and not the way that I've looked at fiction so far in my life, but I don't have nearly the experience with fiction, so this is a learning experience for me as well. But it already brought to mind certain elements that I notice in reading, whereas maybe I'm more attuned to like a character that I resonate with or a relationship dynamic that's playing out. But it sounds like these dramatic elements underpin even why characters will act in a certain way and have the relationships that they have.
Exactly. When it comes to story structure, we really focus on the protagonist and their journey. And there's only one protagonist per story arc, because it is this, it's this growth from beginning to end and that change. But you can go through your manuscript and apply the character flaw and arc to as many characters as you wish. They're not the ones necessarily that the story as a whole is being structured around, but the more that you include of that arc, as you say, the relationship dynamics that you create between them. And in fact, the most important relationship dynamic in a lot of fiction books is between the protagonist and the antagonist. And the antagonist has a dramatic flaw as well that they fail to overcome. And that is the ultimate thing that results in their downfall. And so the relationship of the antagonist not overcoming this flaw and the protagonist overcoming theirs, again, reinforces your theme.
That's really helpful. It's almost like an adjunct to number 3, where the protagonist has that flaw, but they overcome it, and it's instrumental to the storyline unfolding, whereas the antagonist doesn't, and that's the reason why they're the antagonist, right?
Exactly.
In whatever shape or form that takes, whether it's like romance or horror, it could be more gruesome or more sultry.
Yeah, and that is directly launches into the next topic, actually, which are the 9 story structure checkpoints of 3-act structure. That's where all of the work that went into the dramatic elements now pays off in a more fully fledged version of your manuscript, and your plan for your outline is really what you're starting to do here. So 3-act structure is really familiar to lots of people. It's covered in high school. Your English teachers probably told you about it. You've seen the graph of the rising action up to the climax and then kind of the resolution and things like that. And the reason is that that story structure template has been around for literally as long as humans have been telling each other stories. It's there because it works. And you do have this steady increase in tension. It's what keeps you engaged. It's what keeps you interested. It's what keeps you turning pages up until the climax when the antagonist is defeated. And then after that, the tension very quickly deflates from it because the main conflict is over. So you kind of got to wrap it up. You don't want, hundreds of pages where, it's like, okay, I get it. You're living happily ever after. You kind of got to wrap things up. At Writing Academy, we draw it a little bit differently just because that really steady rise isn't very realistic. In fact, it's a series of peaks followed by brief respites, followed by a peak that's a little higher, followed by a respite, going on like that as you build up to the highest point, which is still the climax, and then quickly wrap things up. But in addition to those 3 acts, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, we've added 9 story structure checkpoints, so 3 to each act. And these guide you from beginning to end in terms of what's happening. Some of the checkpoints are very short moments, and some of them cover lots and lots of ground within your manuscript. So Act 1 begins with a checkpoint that's called the hook. And as you might guess, this hook's job is to hook your reader's attention. Drop them into the middle of a situation right away, make them ask questions. The goal of your hook is to raise at least one story question, which is something that the reader wants an answer to. Now, when you choose to answer this story question is completely up to you. If your story question is something that's simply like, what's going on here? You're going to answer that one fairly quickly. If it's who done it, you're not going to answer it until the very end when the mystery is solved and revealed. So that's the goal of the hook, is just to get your attention. You want to start with action. You want to start with dialogue. Don't start with a prologue. A prologue is just a way. If your character doesn't know something, there's no reason your audience should. It's more fun to learn it along with your protagonist than to get an info dump at the beginning. And it sort of used to be the style to do these very long setups, and styles have just changed. So that we really want to start with something snappy, something that will get people hooked. Then you transition into the next checkpoint, which is backstory with a capital B. And this is a longer section, or can be a longer section, of Act 1. And this is where you introduce your protagonist. The reader should start to see what their flaw is, although the character, the protagonist, should not yet realize what their flaw is, because if they did and refused to change, it would be very frustrating. So they don't know what their character flaw is. They don't know why things aren't working out and they can't solve this problem. But your reader should start to see it so that we can start rooting for them to overcome it. This is where you can also introduce basically any information that your reader needs to understand the story to come. It doesn't have to include your character's entire backstory prior to page 1 of your manuscript. You can continue to dole out bits of information throughout the entire manuscript about their past history. But this is where you can do your world building, which is especially important if you're doing science fiction or fantasy, where you can set the ground rules for how things work. This is where you can establish settings and anything that is kind of needed for the reader to understand what's going on belongs in this. We start to see the other characters who are going to be involved, and so on. Now, Act 1 ends with a very short checkpoint called the trigger. And this trigger is an event. It is not a decision or action that the protagonist takes. It is an event that happens to them. And it directly attacks their character flaw. Now, as we've said, they don't know what their flaw is and they don't know how to overcome it yet. And so what happens is that when this flaw is directly attacked, they end up in crisis, which is the checkpoint that begins Act 2. Now, this crisis is basically them being completely overcome by their flaw. They just don't know what to do. And it's this crisis, this horrible feeling that they have that is what launches them into the bulk of Act 2, which the checkpoint is called the struggle. And as the name implies, it is when your protagonist struggles a lot. In most books, Act 2 is the longest, and most of it is made up of the struggle. So this is a series of plot complications where things get worse and worse and worse for your protagonist, and they can't solve the problem because they don't know what their flaw is. And so all of the things, you just keep throwing things at your protagonist in this section that are chipping away at that flaw, chipping away, so that finally they're starting to get a little inkling of like, I can see that I've there's a pattern here. And so there's this black moment at the end of the struggle where things have gotten so bad that they seem like they can't get any worse. But it's this black moment that is sort of a catalyst for your protagonist to have the checkpoint that ends Act 2, which is the epiphany. And the epiphany is the aha moment. It is when they finally, at long last, realize what the reader has known all along, which is, oh my God, I lack self-confidence, or whatever their flaw is. And if I only overcame it, then I would be able to fill in the blank. So it's this emotional moment. There's no plot in it. It's all about the emotion of the character realizing and deciding to change. And that's an important point to emphasize as well, is that they need to both realize what the flaw is and also decide to change. And both halves of that are important, because if the character just realizes and doesn't change, obviously nothing will change for them and they still won't be able to, and you have a tragedy. So if you're writing a tragedy, the epiphany doesn't happen, or the epiphany is unsuccessful. Honestly, there aren't that many tragedies written these days. They are out
Who doesn't
there.
want a happy ending, right?
Yeah, I mean, bittersweet's great, but yeah, you wanna go for it. I tend to encourage people to avoid the tragedy trope if they can, but.
So just to do a quick recap, moving into Act 3, at the end of Act 1, there's a crisis that brings the awareness to the character, or it presses that character flaw in a way that's apparent to all. And then
Yes.
Act 2 can be those series of emotional highs and lows, or a similar theme playing out to greater and greater intensity to the moment where they have the epiphany. And that's the aha, where they consciously see that they want to change and do something different.
Yes, exactly. So Act 2 is a series of long plot complications that's bookended by two story moments. The crisis, where they're overcome by their flaw. I actually kind of like to think of the crisis as an opportunity for an epiphany that fails. They don't have it, which is why they get thrown into this struggle and aren't able to overcome it. And then the epiphany is where finally, after all of this struggle, they do realize and overcome their flaw, which is what sets them up to go into the final act, Act 3, with this overcome flaw and this changed perspective. So the first checkpoint of Act 3 is called the plan. And the plan is something to defeat the antagonist that the protagonist could not have come up with prior to their epiphany. So essentially, the epiphany is the thing that shifts their perspective or their ability to come up with the solution to the problem. Now, it depends on how, like, Act 2 or all of the acts can be of varying length. Act 3 in an action adventure story might be very long, and there could be several plans that don't work before the final one that does. But however many plans you have, kind of by necessity of your plot, ultimately the epiphany allows them to come up with one that they literally could not have come up with prior to that, which leads to the climax, which is the next checkpoint in Act 3. And of course, the climax is the confrontation with the antagonist. And it is when the antagonist is overcome. I should mention that the antagonist has been an active character this whole time. The antagonists should have been felt as soon as possible, certainly throughout the struggle. That's sort of the last possible moment you can introduce the antagonist. Now, of course, we may not know the antagonist's identity, such as a mystery, that may be withheld until the end, but the presence of the antagonist should be felt, and the antagonist should be working against the purposes of the protagonist. But the earlier you can introduce the antagonist, the better you are. But in this final showdown between the protagonist and the antagonist in the climax, it's the point of highest tension. And of course, your protagonist has hatched this plan and has set up the circumstances that will lead to the antagonist's defeat. But like we mentioned earlier, the antagonist has a character flaw. And it is their failure to overcome that character flaw that ultimately results in their downfall. So it's not just your protagonist, bringing them to justice or whatnot. It's something about them as well. So often there's a relationship between the protagonist and antagonist's flaw. Sometimes they have the same flaw, and sometimes they have opposite flaws. So for example, as we said, one of the most common story structuring flaws is lack of self-confidence, which means that one of the most common antagonist flaws is either lack of self-confidence or overconfidence. And so it is that antagonist's inability to overcome their flaw that results in their downfall and the protagonist's triumph as well. So the protagonist is definitely active, but you want to remember that the thing that really is the antagonist's Achilles heel is their own flaw and inability to overcome it. Now, the final checkpoint is the ending, and this is just the resolution. It's your chance to tie up any loose ends, answer any story questions that were not resolved by the climax. And like we kind of hinted earlier, you want to keep it pretty short and sweet. You don't want to, you want to let your characters ride off into their respective sunsets. You don't need to follow them too far. Once the climax is over and the antagonist is defeated, the tension very quickly ebbs from the manuscript.
So it can just be a couple short pages, really, or perhaps even less after that resolution or after the climactic point within the manuscript?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's very rarely more than a couple of chapters. It's usually, a few pages, but in some extreme circumstances, the book can almost end after the climax, as long as things have been resolved enough. One
question that comes to mind is how these hook together. Like if you're writing serial fiction, then I imagine you have the climax, the slight denouement, and then the hook for like what's the beginning of the next adventure, right?
Yeah, and it kind of depends on how your books are structured. So an example that I think is great because so many people have read it is Harry Potter. Because another question that people will always ask in serial fiction is like, well, okay, so the protagonist has this flaw. So what are they like? Does the flaw go over all of the volumes, or what's the deal with that? And the answer is that you have two choices. One's more common than the other. But one choice is that the same flaw could persist over the entire set, and the whole thing could be structured in 3 acts. That's difficult to pull off, especially because each volume has to stand on its own. And so making a good arc within those 3 acts can be a little bit of a struggle. So the more common approach is to have a different flaw in each volume with perhaps an overarching flaw that goes across all of the volumes. And that's how Harry Potter is structured. So each volume of Harry Potter, he has a different flaw that is the story structuring flaw for that one volume. And then lack of self-confidence kind of goes across the entire series until it is resolved in the last volume.
So in that case, you can either introduce a new antagonist or reveal a different flaw volume by volume. But either way, you ultimately want to resolve that underlying issue, that underlying character flaw in the protagonist. Would you?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you think about especially the early volumes of Harry Potter, Voldemort is the antagonist in a lot of those, or rather Voldemort's minions are. And so minion by minion, he's defeated, but Voldemort is always still out there. And so those books do go to enough of a conclusion at the end that you feel satisfied, but you've left Voldemort out there. So you do have to come back for the next one. So yeah, so in your ending, you can go with a very traditional cliffhanger, which is when you really need the next volume right now, or you can kind of seed things throughout so that there's sort of this, bubbling, like, oh, I need the next one. So
That's great. Such a helpful perspective to think about writing, character development, interrelationship between characters. I mean, in full disclosure, I'm taking a lot of notes as you're talking, and I'm here taking my notes as well. So we covered a lot of ground, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit of how the 4 dramatic elements overlay with this story structure when it comes to, plotting out and sitting down and writing your book and bringing this all together into a great, memorable story.
Yeah, definitely. So as you'll recall, the 4th dramatic element, the premise that we put into that single sentence, is basically describing your protagonist's emotional journey from the first page to the climax of the manuscript. And that premise was, what if a flawed protagonist encounters some problem and has to overcome the flaw to solve the problem? So what you've done right there is you've introduced your flawed protagonist in Act 1. They've encountered some problem in Act 2 that they just can't overcome. They can't overcome it. They can't overcome it. Then finally, they overcome their flaw in the epiphany and solve the problem in Act 3 by defeating the antagonist. So that's a reminder of the emotional core, because when you do the 9 checkpoints, it's very focused on the story. And there is a lot of plot that goes into it. This is why the other big pushback I will often hear is when people hear story structure, they assume formulaic, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. These 9 checkpoints are the things that allow you to really apply your creativity and your individuality onto building your world and your characters and the plot things that are happening. But the fact of the matter is that the plot is less important for the emotional journey than anything else. The plot is what makes it unique, it's what makes it you, but it's not the thing that is structurally important. It's this arc that is structurally important. So that's what the dramatic elements do right up front, is that they really force you to focus on that. And so as you write, you can refer back to your theme and make sure that all of the obstacles you're throwing at your protagonist are serving that theme, so that when they overcome it, that is the theme. Now, it's not uncommon to discover stuff during the writing process. So, a first draft is exactly that. It's a first draft. And so having these 9 checkpoints and a more detailed scene outline is incredibly helpful for actually finishing the manuscript. But it is, of course, you're going to discover stuff as you go. So you can also revisit the checkpoints as you go. If you've discovered things that work better, or you want to go in a different direction in terms of the theme, or even the flaw for your character. Of course, that will involve reworking parts of the manuscript that you've already written, which is why we suggest so strongly that you do this work up front before you commit that much effort.
Absolutely. And I'm aware that we're sort of hovering above specific genres and areas of focus, but as you were talking, I can see how this applies to a romance as much to a mystery, as much to like a horror or thriller type book, as much to probably, you could name any other type of genre of fiction.
It
So
really does.
yeah, and it really does underpin almost all fiction, doesn't it?
Yeah,
In a
on a
sense.
fundamental level,
Yeah.
fiction is about a protagonist and an antagonist. And you know, for our romance writers out there, um, the only thing that's unique about that genre is that more often, well, more than any other genre, the antagonist is likely to be the other love interest, which creates a little bit of a different dynamic in terms of their defeat and downfall. So one thing to note about that defeat and downfall of the antagonist is that it's commensurate with the stakes of your story. So, you don't give Voldemort a slap on the wrist, and, you don't send a third grade bully to jail for life. So similarly with that, in a romance, the downfall may simply be admitting that they were wrong and apologizing and making the grand gesture and things like that. But the fundamental story structure is the same. It's about a protagonist and an antagonist who are at odds with one another, and how one of them changes and the other one doesn't. And you can apply that to any genre. And your antagonist can be a huge character or not be revealed until the very end, as long as their actions are felt. So you really, with these, it focuses on the protagonist's journey and allows you to know with confidence that the emotional journey is going to work and make sense. And then whatever genre, whatever plot you build around your characters and your situation and your setting, creativity is your, whatever you want. Dream big.
That's great. And man, thank you so much, Dani, for coming on and sharing your perspective. It's been very insightful and very practical. Like, this is a really useful training of all of the videos that you've seen, from writing a great book proposal to how to write a transformational nonfiction book. And this here strikes me as its own transformational arc, but as applied to all types of fiction. So thank you so much for covering that base, and for just contributing your knowledge and the prizes to this contest as well.
Of course, really looking forward to it.
Yeah. And for everybody that's watching, if you'd like this taste of Dani, this is just a small taste of the training and the resources that they have available at Writing Academy, really taking this structure, and I believe probably have much more intellectual property too, and diving deep into genres from mystery to romance to thriller to biography to memoir. And so if you're writing any one of those, then one of their courses will really help you. If you're writing any one of those as well, the prize that they've contributed will absolutely help you, which is year-long access to all of their courses and all of the trainings that they've created at Writing Academy. So I'd like to actually give you a moment just to talk about what all is included in that, to incentivize everybody here to throw their hat in the ring and write a book proposal and aim to win.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we've done courses in a lot of genres. And the story structure that we've been talking about for the last half hour or so applies to every genre. But of course, there are unique quirks to mystery, to science fiction, different things you need to be aware of, romance, how to make sure that those work. And so each of those courses retains the strong emphasis on story structure, but goes into genre-specific details and uses genre-specific books as well for good examples of the different elements that we're talking about. So the prize is our Author's Success Bundle. And this is for people who really want to launch their career as an author, because it gives you access to all of our courses. So we've got fiction courses, we've got nonfiction courses. One thing we haven't talked about at all in this is that we have screenwriting courses and also adaptation courses and how to go from novel to screenplay. And we also have courses in self-publishing, which is one of the, a great option for people as well. So no matter where you want to go with your author career, every lesson ends with marketing and publishing advice, whether you wish to seek traditional or self-publishing. And you have the tools and the the depth of knowledge that you really need no matter what project. And of course, we're seeing more and more blending different genres. Romance is probably the most common, that you can think of many examples of, books that are marketed as mysteries but have strong romantic elements and things like that. So yeah, the Author's Success Bundle gives you access to all of them so that you can really have a wide base from which to launch your authorial career.
I love it. So that's one of the prizes that's up for grabs. Thank you to Dani and Writing Academy for contributing that prize. And you can't win if you don't enter the contest. So below where you're watching this video, there's a button. You can learn all about the structure for the contest. When you enter at any level, you'll be supported through writing a book proposal, submitting it, and getting professional feedback along the way. And whether or not you win a prize, you're still going to win, because writing a great book proposal and interacting with people like Dani, myself, and the other authors and experts that we've brought on is more than half the battle to really building a career as an author. So engaging in content like this, writing a book proposal, and as icing on the cake, you could win access to every course that Writing Academy has created. So encourage you all to join the contest before the July 2nd deadline. It's coming up, and then we're going to be tuned in, working with everybody on their book proposal. Could be your book proposal, in order to win some of these amazing prizes. So thanks once again, Dani, and give you the last word, then we'll send everybody on their way to get writing.
Thanks so much. Well, I will leave you with Writing Academy's sign off, which is happy writing.
Love it. Happy writing. We'll see you in the future video.